Thank you, Monica Forman. Welcome to be here at this recording of the podcast. Monica is the CA of the past European University Debating Championships. But not only that, she's a well-known and respected CA for many years on the circuit already, as well as a debate coach hailing from Tel Aviv. Hello, Monica. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. It's quite exciting and feels a bit nerdy, but very fun at the same time to get to speak about something that I love.
Yeah, so I think there's many things we could have brought you in to talk about today, but today we're going to talk specifically about the process of being a good chief adjudicator. And of course, a chief adjudicator has a couple of important roles, right? Chief one being setting motions, but also looking at your judging pool, making sure that the draw runs on time together with the tap team. So it's a very important role, sort of spinning the web when you organize competitions. So I'm very excited to dive right in. And maybe let's start with a personal question. You've just run the Astana EUDC, which was also the first online Euros. And can you tell me a little bit about how it was to work on that program? Were there things that were very different, things that were very exciting for you?
So I have to say it was really, really tiring and really fun at the same time. So I think I've already told you this in a private conversation, but it often feels that when you are seeing a tournament, it's like hosting your own party. So on the one hand, you're really happy because you get people to enjoy your party and you get to think about all the aspects that make people enjoy, and yet you are a bit anxious to see, are people having a good time? Are they happy? Are they doing well? So I think it was, I guess even more than any other tournament, a roller coaster. In the sense that not only did we have to work on regular things for Euros, we had to reinvent the tournament about 4 months before it started. And I guess the first thing that I was happy is that we actually saved the tournament because it wasn't as clear cut that this is what is going to happen. In terms of the organizing team, which basically lost everything they wished, which is to host in Astana and to get people excited about their city and to learn more about their culture. And the fact that they were good to go on board and to really put in a lot of work without any of the reward was amazing. And also in terms of the team, that I know that people on the CA team and on other teams that have helped us had to deal with uncertainties in life and with the situation that wasn't easy for them because of Corona. And the fact that everyone said, okay, we're doing this despite, I think was really amazing. So I was very relieved that we got to do it. But also I have to say that we decided that we're not just going to create a Euros. So it wasn't just about let's have a tournament, but we still went on with a lot of the things that we wanted to do in physical Euros. So we really insisted, for example, on having the Brilliance Award. So even though it's not the same thing as having people debating live, we still wanted to promote the value of it's good that people speak eloquently. It's nice to have moments that we all remember that we can share in debating. So that is something that we still did. We ran a judge test that was quite a lot of work for us as a team, and yet we said that we feel that this represents much more of people's capabilities of adjudicating, and we went on with it nonetheless. And other considerations that we still did, like taking a week off from work before Euros, even though it's working from home. So we couldn't even give that excuse of, oh, we're flying abroad somewhere. So I think it was really intense, but I was very happy about that. Finally,
Go ahead.
after Euros, I still had, I think for a week or more, the feeling that I'm missing something, that there is something I need to do. Now, I had nothing to do, luckily, so no work, it was summer holiday, but I still had that nagging feeling of, am I missing something? Is there something going on that I'm not working on?
Yeah, and I think it's real testament to the work that when I was adjudicating at your competition, it really felt impeccably well planned and organized. And there were even aspects where I found the online experience to be very welcoming. For instance, it never has been as easy for me to give feedback to teams. I could just send them a note in the chat. I didn't need to like find them in a hallway full of thousands of people, and they could also find me. And I had also, but that maybe is more akin to my own strengths, I had more time to think about what is like the best point I want to emphasize towards them. But also, of course, on the organizational side, the tournament ran very well on time. We were very well notified what was happening, so it really felt like a competition that had a lot of amazing effort put into it. You mentioned the Brilliance Award as being one of the things that you care deeply about, which is the award for the best outround or the most eloquent outround speech. And in that sense, it also shows to us that debating to an extent is an aesthetic hobby. So maybe let's start with a first question into the aesthetics of motion setting. Was there any motion that you set at the Astana EUDC that you're particularly proud of, that you think was a wonderful or beautiful motion?
So one of my favorites in this tournament was about ex-convicts and whether society should forget their past crimes once they are released from prison. And I guess the reason that I like it is because it has to do with something that we constantly talk about. We constantly talk about people's right to be forgotten, or whether we are really giving people a second chance, or what prison does to people. And it feels even a bit old at times when we speak about that. And then what we wanted to do is we wanted to say, okay, let's test whether people actually believe in what they say. Let's take this into a different context, into a more sci-fi world, and let's see whether people are willing to defend this, or what kind of faults people can find in this. And also to really place this in a context where you have a prop and you have an op, in that sense that you can't say, okay, I agree with everything except for this one tiny thing, because the world changes so dramatically that you can't just say, this debate is about this little niche thing that I can come up with. You really have to say, okay, am I willing to deal with all the consequences, or am I not willing to deal with them? So I think this motion tries to capture it, but I would say that I think it's an example of something that we try to do with all of our motions. So something that we really strived for is to have real life debates, in the sense that people would have to defend stances that others believe in society. And I think, and it's probably for good reasons, but there is an element of groupthink in the debating community, and we wanted to shake people up a bit from that and to put them really in other people's shoes. And I think it creates a more interesting debate, but I think it creates more of an ability to actually convince in real life, because in real life, you want to debate people that are that like-minded.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And and I think a
yeah.
very good example of one of those motions as well is the motion you said preceding to the round. You just talked about the 10-minute school in Bangladesh, which I felt it was a very clever, subtle way of bringing in, say, the cancel culture debate, but radically altering the actors that were involved. Where most of the cancel culture debate now is about sort of progressive spheres trying to block out the free speech rights of groups, and this now is about a religious organization that tries to do the same, and it sort of swaps the positions for many people what's in which they need to be facing. So I thought that indeed was very clever. So I'm wondering, when you express all that, and I think you did this motion that really does this in very subtle ways, was that like an explicit aim that you and the rest of your team articulated beforehand, or was this something you found out you all shared an interest in whilst you were creating motions? So can you delve a little bit deeper into that part of the motion setting process for me?
Yeah, so definitely this is something we aimed for, in the sense that we wanted to create motions that are thought-provoking without being provocative. So we really tried not to be blunt about things, but to get people to think differently, and to have to make arguments that they don't necessarily agree with. And this is definitely something that we thought about. So that's why we really encouraged everyone on the team to think outside of the box and to bring up any idea that they could have, whether it's things they hear in work, whether it's things that they just randomly encounter. And we told them, okay, we want you to be creative. So there's no need to do same old thing that we're used to. And actually, the story of the 10-minute school is really fascinating. So I'm really happy that you mentioned it, because it started with me noticing that many Bangladeshi debaters are all of a sudden speaking about this controversy. And I reached out to the Bangladeshi debaters that I knew to ask, what is this? And to try and understand the conversations that they were having. And they actually got me to speak with the COO of 10-minute school. And I really spoke with him about his thoughts and his takes on it. Apparently he is a former debater himself. And then I told him, look, I really want to debate about this. Are you okay with that? And I guess the part of that was my concern that a lot of people see debates as being illegitimate if you talk about other people problems. And I said, okay, I'm going to get like real consent and real permission for that. And I was so happy that he said, I really want this to be a debate. I really want people to talk about my situation. I don't know whether I'm making the right decision, and I think it's worth that people try and explore that.
Have you also received feedback from him after the debates? Did he like watch your rounds and comment on it?
So he didn't comment about the specific round that he saw, but he was very excited about the fact that it turned out to be a motion, and he said that people said really clever things during that debate. So I was really happy about that.
So we might be seeing the next set of policy advisors already having started their careers in Astana unwittingly. That is wonderful. So you mentioned the power of creativity, and that you've encouraged yourself and all your other team members to really think outside the box, come up with, I think, a fascinating set of ideas. Can you talk a little bit more about the process? So is this then a thing where everyone individually goes and brainstorm and then puts 20 ideas in a spreadsheet, and then you start shouting at each other in the comment threads? Or were there group brainstorm sessions? Like, how are you able to take those, what we call seed ideas, into actual workable motions? How do you decide which ones to run and which one unfortunately need to be discarded?
So I think the process starts months before Euros. So we had a policy of not setting motions in any other tournament. And I think it forced us to save our ideas. I know that many of us had, even on their phones, lists of ideas that we had. And I felt that process for me was reading the newspapers, talking to people about things, and then, oh, this could be a motion. This could be something that I want to run. And then we had a very long motion list, and we started chatting in comments about them, and then we started ranking them. And I think this was something that happened organically, but I think some of us delved more into reading about the motions, and some decided, okay, I don't want to read about this. I want to represent someone who's just encountered it and didn't necessarily study about that. And then we started talking about, okay, what do we think about this? Where is this going? What are the clashes? And once we've narrowed down the list to about 30 something motions we liked, we actually started running them in the sense of playing the game. So we randomly decided on each motion, your prime minister, your leader of opposition, your closing government, and closing opposition. And then we could see what are the arguments that we could make, setting ourselves as a benchmark of probably this is the top room. Let's see if they have enough things to talk about, whether they see it as balanced. And then I think we had a lot of fun with it. And I think we chose the motions that we enjoyed more. So one example that I know is a bit controversial, but is the mindfulness motion, which is a difficult one, I admit, because it's not easy to talk about something that doesn't have an immediate impact. It's more of a cultural trend. It's more of a mindset or something that subtly influences how we think. But when we ran this and when we ran this through our testers, everyone had a really good time trying to think about what does this do to us? And we even had a situation where some members of the team that thought that there is nothing wrong with mindfulness because they themselves practiced said, well, I get it. I think there might be a negative side to it. So I think a lot of the test was, are we having a good time? Can we come up with arguments that are not only the generic backlash or things that we're accustomed to hear, but to really, as debaters, think outside of the box and not just as motion setters?
I think that's a very interesting and very useful approach, certainly when you come to big tournaments and you often have the time for these type of motion setters. I'm remembering that back when we did the same thing for Novi Sad Euros in 2018, we had one motion that we had quite a significant large amount of doubt over. We thought teams would like make certain pathways that make it hard to run. This was the motion about human smuggling for refugees that we ran as the ESL quarters. And then we watched the eventual debate, and it turned out that teams actually were making none of the arguments that we'd anticipated that went in their own direction, admittedly in some quarters for better and some for worse outcomes. So to what extent do you feel that this prep that you did, that's translated into the type of arguments that you heard about when you were running these debates? And then maybe as a follow-up, I'm also curious, so you mentioned that the mindfulness debate was controversially received. What do you do when you receive that input after you've worked so hard trying to set that round? Do you take it on board, or do you have the desire to say, no, hold on, you're all missing these arguments that we clearly came up with? So how do you take those lessons aboard?
So I think we generally saw this as a moment for pedagogy. In the sense that we didn't always get what we wanted, but we didn't always aim for that. So here, and I think this is also another trend that we wanted to avoid, oftentimes you see CAs trying to come up with motions that are really well defined in the sense of, okay, so opening government won't be able to screw this up. So we are going to really give them a definition and make it clear what this debate is about. And we said, no, we're willing to take a risk. We want people to think more. We want people to try harder. We know that in some cases they won't be able to, and it's fine. I mean, the risk is the judges would suffer a bit more, which we're among them, so we're okay, but people will learn from this. So in that sense, it was unfortunate that some people said that they didn't have a good time, because that's not what we aimed for. We aimed for this being hard, but you enjoying the process of this being hard, even if this means that there might be a round that you won't do that well, and eventually this would even out through 9 rounds. But it's definitely a risk that we took, because we said we really care about putting this on the table and making this an option, and letting people know that this is also something that they can imitate and do later on.
Mm-hmm. And eventually you then come up with this list of motions, of course. How do you determine which motion makes for, say, a good final or a good round 9? Like, we're noticing, of course, certain patterns appear, right? So like the middle round on the first day very often is a very technical motion. So you said something about Amazon's internal arbitration court back in 2018. We said a motion about different ways to create incentives in healthcare systems. We're seeing, of course, that very often somewhere in the mid-pack, there's another economics round. There often art motions are there. Round 9s tend to be very either very straightforward but high impact to do, or have a relatively counterintuitive idea you need to grasp with. are those type of like set of things that you always use and you say this motion best fits this hole, or is it a more organic process? So how did you manage to say this motion should belong there?
So as you said, there are several anchors that we take into consideration. So round 9 should be a sorting in a way. So it should make sure that good teams are in the break. And that's why we wanted something more straightforward in the sense of if you are able to analyze well, then you would have an advantage in this round and less of an option of I got this position, therefore I will not be in the break. Round 1 should be relatively accessible. And here we had less of a concern for depth just because rooms are a bit random. We wanted the last round of each day to be more on a light or fun note, just to get people to their social or to whatever they did on a more positive feeling, irrespectively of the position that they got. Then on early out rounds, also to ensure that they are good for sorting people with different skills. So whether it is the IR or whether it is the ability to think about more in-depth arguments, or whether it is to think broadly about different issues. So we try to do that. And then there are specific considerations for specific motions. So for example, and here it's a bit ironic that I'm using that because we had a meme about our open semifinals, which was a motion about Israel and the Kurds in Syria, which we chose to be in the open semi for a reason. We thought it would be unfair to put it in an ESL out round because you usually have Israelis there, and I mean, it's wonderful to have them in the open semis, but it's a bit of a novel thing for that to happen. So we couldn't expect that, and we figured that it would be more fair to put it there. So that's a specific consideration for a specific motion, or we wanted to make sure that we don't have motions that are too similar in skills or in topic on the same day. So then we try to make sure that we don't have an overlap, and then we push them to different days. And the finals, we wanted to be not too complicated, but interesting. So here we wanted them to be entertaining for people to watch as well, especially as this is an online Euros, so you don't have the automatic buy-in of people are already in the venue waiting for food and are going to watch the final. So we wanted to have a topic that people would say, wow, I really want to hear what they have to say about that.
I think that you definitely succeeded on that one, considering I think more than 1,000 people have saw that final, even if not streamed live, then at the very least very shortly after. So that's indeed a very good job done. Is there anything that you would want to have changed about the motion process, or any outcome that you are disappointed about and you would have like swapped around with now being able to look back, or are you completely satisfied with the way that you ran this competition and set these motions?
So I think I am satisfied. I think there are interesting things that I would like to check, but I'm not sure it's possible, more in a scientific way. So for example, something that Tom suggested back in the day, and I think is really interesting, is to try and do an A/B test for motions, to set them the reverse way in terms of what government has to defend and what opposition has to defend, and then see whether it has effects on the way people debate, or to run different experiments with people from different societies debating them. But I'm not sure I would change the set just for me to be curious about what makes people or motions stick.
Tom's suggestion sounds a lot like what they do at the Ostros debating championships, where they have like a set of 3 motions and government and opposition have a sort of pre-debate negotiation to decide which motions they run. And it always leads to interesting results about, okay, so which motion gets most vetoed by which team ends up doing better in the motions that are eventually chosen. So that sounds like a very interesting approach to get better at understanding how topics to be set. And to that light, maybe it would be a good advice to say to TA teams of upcoming competitions, here are the flipped positions of a certain motions. And if you feel like you're lacking a motion, feel very free to reuse them, because there are enough debating competition happening that could be used. That's I think is actually a very wonderful idea. And I think it therefore also probably very good to say the knowledge that you accumulate as a CA team probably needs to be pushed on. So for the people who will be organizing Madrid Euros next year, what specific piece of advice would you have for them that you wish you knew when you started preparing for Astana?
So I think number one advice is really be organized. So it's not exactly about motions, but it's more about the process. And it's the kind of thing that no one teaches you, that it's really about being a manager, and it's really about working as a team and really organizing a tournament. So in a small tournament, there are many aspects that you don't even have to think about. And I found that it's really important for me to have everything in mind, in the sense of, okay, what are the different aspects of a tournament that we need to take into consideration? So we need a judge test to be taken care of. We need motions to be taken care of. We need, in our case, guidelines for working online and going over different scenarios of how we want the tournament to be run, writing manuals for debating aspects and for technological aspects. And I guess my advice would be, try and be as in control and ahead of things and not let things surprise you. So constantly work with lists, with charts, with Gantt, and try to organize work so that it's not the last minute and then, okay, we have to do this and this and this, but you know, I have this person working on this, I have this person working on that, and then you just need to check up, and there will be definitely on the minute or last minute issues to deal with, but then if you have other things under control, it's less stressful.
I think what this answer reveals is just how much is under the tip of the iceberg that is motion setting, that is actually part of what a CA team needs to do. And I think therefore it is a far more gargantuan task than people might be considering. So it's interesting, I think, to delve a bit deeper into some of the aspects that CA teams need to be aware of when they organize things. So let's first talk about judges. So you had hundreds of judges that needed to judge this large amount of rounds. How did you manage to convince all of them to spend a week of their lives holed up in their room with internet, listening to people from across the continent debating?
So here, actually, you're touching upon something that we were so worried about. And it was really, we felt blessed that we had so many amazing judges willing to judge this Euros and willing to help out. And doing this despite not being able to get paid for the work that they do. Because we knew from an early stage that unfortunately we don't really have the ability to give proper compensation for people. I mean, if I were to realistically value people's time, I would have given much more because I think it's hard work and I think it's good work that is being done by people. And I think the reason we had so many great people is really the sense of camaraderie, is the feeling that we're a community and people wanted to help out and did it for pure reasons. And what we had to do, we had to deal with the bureaucracy of it. So to keep lists of people, to make sure to remind people, to give us answers, to be in touch with people that didn't know at the moment that we've asked. But what we felt is our job is to approach our friends and to ask them whether they're willing to do this really to help out other friends.
That's, I think, a very good approach in general, right? That because in the end, this is a volunteering activity, and a volunteer, of course, will never be compensated in monetary terms fairly for what they do. So we get our compensation out of the fact that we want to volunteer, and in that sense, I feel that's a very good effort and job that you like expand upon that norm of camaraderie, and you tell them how deeply grateful it is, especially, of course, in the online environment where you don't get that camaraderie by seeing your friends all the time, but you are doing this service and then hopefully directed in some way. Of course, it's not just a free-for-all, thank you for coming, and that's about it. Judging is far more than just a nice thing you do for other people. We also want people to become good judges, say, and we also want to make sure that the judging happens fairly in that sense. So maybe, like you say, using the lens of how you eventually winnow down towards a judge break, what are the various ways in which you guys were able to ensure both that you got good quality judging and to accurately assess who was a good quality judge in this competition?
So we worked really hard on having an entire system of grading our judges in the sense that we had an IA test that we didn't use eventually, but would have used more if there were a physical tournament, and a judge test that consisted of both multiple answer the questions and actually judging a debate. And we really wanted to get information about the way people do the judging job, because we felt, and this is also something that I think there are opinions for both sides, but I'm a fan of judging a debate video, because I think that multiple choice questions, they test whether you understand debate and whether you understand the rules, but not necessarily how you deal with real life situations. And I think there can be questions about, here is a scenario, but they're only an proxy for how a debate is run. And there are always then questions of, okay, but did this person get the question? Or could it be that they answered wrongly because they thought there is additional information that is not mentioned in the question? So we wanted to balance this out with, okay, here you see a debate, give your rationale behind it and give your call. And more than the importance of the call, so it was graded, but we graded much more the quality of the rationale. And here we really try to see whether people are comparative in the way that they adjudicate, whether people give good reasonings or bad reasonings, whether people are really attentive to things that they heard in the debate. So are they missing claims that were made? Are they adding to claims that were made? And these are the kind of things that you don't see in written questions. So this was one way of assessing. Then, of course, we wanted to balance this with a CV in the sense of a CV is a good indication for whether you did well consistently. And although you break at a specific tournament, I think it does give you a lot of information to know whether this person has broken in many tournaments or not. But we also had different weights for discrepancies. So for example, you have no CV or just a beginning judge, but you have an amazing test, you're going to get a grade that is more lenient towards the test, because at least you should be flagged as this person has a lot of potential, even though they didn't judge a lot. And you could be in a situation where you have good CVs, but you did really poorly on the test, and then we can't just credit your past achievements, but we need to flag this as well. So there was a lot of work on creating this system and also thinking about the different questions. And I think that part was also interesting for us because it was a mix of, we had a table of different skills that you need as a judge and different things that we value in good adjudication. So we wanted to have a question for each. And then we also thought about what are trends that we don't like in adjudication. So what are the kind of things that you might see several judges doing, but we don't necessarily think this is good judging? And then to try and have a question to sort out the people that belong to the trend and people that don't, and different real life scenarios that we've seen as judges. So cases that we thought were interesting. We judged a debate and then we said, okay, that's an interesting dilemma that I had as a judge, and then to try and convey this into the test. So that was a really long process of creating this, and then we tested the test on people that were not judges at the tournament, but helped us then in other ways, which I would say in brackets is another nice thing that people did for us. So even though some people couldn't attend Euros, they did things behind the scenes. So for example, Omer Nevo really helped us with things, and even though he has a small child at home that prevented him from actually attending Euros, he really helped us with other things. So that was one of them. So that's a huge process for giving people marks. And another decision that we did before we even started was to say we are not tweaking marks. So it wouldn't be fair for us to say, I know this person, and then to change their marks, because then it creates a discrepancy that is only based on whether people know us personally. And then we might miss out people that are really good, but we don't know them, or the other way around, that we would let our personal feelings for people impact the judging. And then we had, during the tournament, a system of feedbacks that, once again, we didn't interfere in the sense of our opinion, but what we did is we made the feedback weighed, because feedback is good for certain information about people, but it has its downsides. So for example, feedback tends to disproportionately harm female chairs. It tends to disproportionately favor EPL adjudicators. And we wanted to avoid that, to avoid a discrepancy that is too big. So we gave weighed, I guess, proportion to the feedback as well. So we didn't touch the feedback, but we didn't make this the epitome of the grade that you had. And here, luckily, we had Tom that could write algorithms from scratch on how to ensure that this is done in a fair way, and not just that your mark changes based on that. And then also, in the end, we had a list then of all of our judges and the grades that they have in the end. And we've also then tried to see whether we have a proportional representation of people. So once again, we didn't tweak with the numbers, but we wanted to make sure that we have enough female and DSL judges that are on the list of breaking. And we added people more for representation that are simply the next in line in terms of the grade that they received. So that's how we decided. And then in the break, it's really hard in the sense that you have a lot of great judges, and you have a lot of time zones, and you have a lot of clashes. And then it becomes a real puzzle of, okay, who can I put in which round? And also in a way that doesn't make people feel unappreciated. So we really, really tried to have our best judges judge as further as possible. And there were instances that because of a clash, we couldn't put someone higher, although we really wanted. So we did our best. I hope we did it well. I would say, I guess, for the sake of the interview, and it's important for CAs to remember that when reviewing people's CV, you should take with a pinch of salt the extent of how high people broke at a specific tournament. I mean, if there are consistencies, I think it tells you more, but in a specific term, and sometimes you have someone who's really great but couldn't judge a higher round, and then it doesn't mean that they're not worth more.
I think that's a very useful caveat. I think there's two common objections that are often framed to the way in which we select judges to become chair or to break. I'm just interested to see what your thoughts on that are. So I think the first one is that even though I think you point out fairly well that the CV isn't everything and people are like being assessed on the basis of a test as well, which I think is a more pure approximation of what their skill set is. There's still, I think, often the idea that people have that people who have a certain amount of rep, that the system doesn't disbalance enough to make sure that someone who, for instance, was a good judge in the past, knows most of the answers, isn't necessarily perceived as a great judge during the rounds, goes down in their score, and comparatively that it's quite hard for an up-and-coming talent without a large amount of experience to work their way up towards the break. And do you feel that that is a fair critique of the way that you did it in this year, or do you think it went fairly given the considerations you put into the system?
So I think this year, at least, we really tried for this to be done fairly. I can tell you that we had entire lists of people that we flagged as, okay, this person might have potential. And it is those people that started with no CV but really high score that we said, okay, we're putting them with chairs we trust. Or during the tournament, we had a chair that was ranked really high and they gave a really high feedback. So we said, okay, that might be an indication. And then we tested people constantly. And I think this year's break was simply very, very competitive in the sense that we had even some of our IAs not breaking. And it's not because they're not good, it's just because we wouldn't be able to utilize everyone. And then we had to go with the best. So I think generally it's a relevant criticism and something to notice and something that we really tried to tackle. And I think it's a constant effort to try and ensure that this is done and this is done fairly.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair answer. And one of the things that I really like is both that you do the combination of, say, we're making sure that things like feedback are written into an algorithm rather than they become the basis of personal infection. But also it sounds like you've managed to tweak the algorithm in such a way that the scores of very trusted chairs do account to some extent so that they become both a good, because we know that these are often very good bits of feedback, but also they don't get overweighted, they get weighted fairly. I think that this is a very, very beneficial approach in that sense. Do you think that, for instance, that type of code could become more available, or are these algorithms too specifically written for the amount of rounds of Euros, the amount of feedback that you receive, that this is not something that a tournament could plug into their system?
So I think we can actually. And here, I guess, more specifically, it really depends on when Tom has time, but I know that he has plans of releasing the algorithms as well. And this is definitely something that we would love to share in the sense of we think it's a great tool and we think it's very good for people to use it and criticize it in a way that they find fair rather than use only intuitions or only feedback.
Yeah, I think that's very good. Another set of objections that often is raised around the idea of like diversity in judge break. And I think that the community has studied the diversity literature well enough to say we should have diversity. So probably most of the argument rests upon, so how do we define what a diverse judge break is? So for instance, back in 2018, we took considerable care to make sure that indeed both ESL and gender representation were formed well enough, but then we ended up having a judging pool in the out rounds that mostly consisted of a set of EPL judges supplanted by judges from the Netherlands and Israel. And we lacked Central and Eastern European representation, which we then I think were fairly criticized for in the corridors. And did you look at any other criteria than that? Did you feel that, for instance, having this type of geographical criteria should also be included? Or to what extent does that type of diversity mean that the judge break gets more valued?
So I think that in worlds, definitely circuits and geography matters because you have so much diversity, not only in the places people come from, but also in the assessment of how to judge, which varies from circuit to circuit. Specifically in Euros, I think it's a bit less of a concern in the sense that I think the two major groups are continental adjudicators and Iona adjudicators. So I find that there is a lot of similarity between Dutch and Israeli and Serbian judges. And then I'm not sure that there is that much of a difference between them in how they view debate. But also I think, and here it was because of the nature of an online Euros and the composition of judges that we had, we didn't want to limit ourselves to representation from different geographical groups because to begin with, our IA pool didn't necessarily reflect equally those different circuits. So for example, we had a lot of Israelis that were willing to judge for us. And then we said, it wouldn't be fair to punish a circuit that wanted to help so much by saying, okay, we're putting a cap on the amount of people that can judge, especially as this creates another, I guess, how do you call it? Skewing of the people that judge, because then you have people like Dan Lav and Ayal that are definitely going to break, but then if you have a cap, then it means that other Israelis that are newcomers don't have that ability. And then we don't allow people to progress. So we said that at least for our year, geography matters a bit less, and it's more about the language division.
Okay, that's very good. And I think in some way it mirrors, for instance, the debate surrounding the glass ceiling, where I think some critiques of approach for female quotas in top boards have said that's all well and good if some people make it at the top, but you also should look at the way that we like advance people in the lower rungs. And I think to an extent, this might be an argument to saying, whilst it is very important that we keep on balancing EUDC as much as possible, that shouldn't be the end all of it, because the EUDC break is, in that sense, getting towards the top of the field, but rather getting a most representative EUDC breaks also in large part is going to be done not by making necessarily the final step of EUDC more inclusive, because it only reflects the existing disparities that exist in the debating community. And if we therefore truly want a more inclusive and diverse break in the EUDC, the work probably needs to be done on the local level, running local tournaments really well, making sure that judges there are trained up and therefore build themselves up rather than go on the continental level first, so more of a bottom-up than a top-down approach.
Yeah, so I completely agree. And I think in tournaments like Euros, we are very lucky that we have also a lot of great female judges that are represented even more than your average local tournament. And I think that definitely we need to consider in local tournaments, not simply a quota, but really assessing and really helping out different adjudicators. Because if we simply go for, we need more women in the final, we end up in a situation where our CVs are not that reflective anymore, because we might have someone who a lot of people in high places think is really bad, and now can present different breaks and they say, oh, it doesn't mean anything. And then they wouldn't consider CVs as much as they should. So I think it's really a process of being honest when promoting people, but giving people tools to be better adjudicators as well.
I think that's also a very wonderful answer. And what you're saying here also means that, say, the Astana training program, which is incredibly extensive, conducted a large amount of workshop, is one of those drivers to make sure that people get to EDC more well prepared. Certainly if they are from less represented groups, because as you're pointing out, if it is just about making sure there's representation at the top level, we can just put a couple of puppets there. If we don't support their actual learning questions and goals, then all we end up doing is making sure that someone sits at the table but doesn't feel very welcome or equipped to actually sit at that table. And rather, if we support them, they'll organically reach to the side of the table, because then to the extent the meritocratic structures that do exist are able to fairly recognize them to that extent. Of course, with some blind spots being taken away by having at least the effort for inclusion, but not like hard, stupid quota. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful suggestion. Maybe one final element then. So we've talked about judging, we've talked about motion setting, but the final bit, I guess, that is part of being in a CA team is that you also have to run the logistics of the draw, cooperating with the tab team. And that often, I think, gets unnoticed when we talk about CAing. So could you tell a little bit more about how that worked for you? How did you manage to communicate with tab team? And to what extent did you feel you had a role as a CA? And to what extent did you feel that the tabbers could run the show for you?
So here I would start by saying that we had an amazing tab team, in the sense that we could really, really trust them, and that came up with their own ideas and suggestions for things to automate and things to run in a way that is smoother. And not only that, what I really appreciated about them is their professionalism, in the sense of not only did they invent different systems, everything was tried before. So we didn't want anything to surprise us by having it run the first time in Euros. So constantly I knew that whenever they suggest something, this is something that is tested already. So I guess that's the first aspect. The second is that we worked really closely with them before the tournament on different things, like deciding how many Zoom accounts we're going to have. Are we having a lobby? Are we not having a lobby? Asking them basically to indulge us on things that are not even that crucial, but we wanted, just like the music bot that we had. It's a kind of thing that you don't need in order to run a Euros, but we wanted to give people a feeling of this is as close to a physical Euros as you can have, and we do want to spread a bit of joy and fun in the process. And the tab really listened to us, and although they could have said, oh, this is more work for us, they said, no, this is what you want, and we're with you on this. Also on really writing all of the manuals. So the moment we decided on our systems, we started writing our tech guide and our manual, and we constantly had drafts sent back and forth between ourselves, in the sense of, we told them, okay, we don't want the tournament to run too late. We're thinking about giving this amount of minutes for recovery for this situation. Do you think this is plausible? Going over the schedule, making sure that it makes sense, where we want to put our breaks, how long we want our breaks to be. So constantly we had to be in touch with them, and I think even more than a physical Euros, in which usually you meet the week before, and then just everyone does their own thing. So it was constant work before. During, we had 2 out of the 5 people on the team sit out each round. And what we did was to run preformed shadow panels for rooms. So obviously we didn't have the teams, which is even better in terms of setting different panels, but we knew strength of rooms. So we had top room, second room, third room, all the way down. And based on the round number, we could decide which rooms we want to give what types of panel strength. Now, luckily, we had really good judges, so it wasn't like we had to make tough decisions of, okay, this room might have to suffer, but this is a privilege, really, that we had. But we had then 2 people really going over everything and creating these panels. Then once the round was over and we had everyone back, we could have the teams now in that preformed setup, and then we could first look at clashes, and then we could make tweaks into this, but this then took us way less time than it did, and we had other members of the team going over different shards of the list for a sanity check and a balance check as well, just because we trusted each other completely, but oftentimes there are things that you just miss because you're still using your naked eye, at the end of the day, and then it's good to have another set of eyes going over and saying, well, this room apparently doesn't have any ESL judge in it, but it has ESL teams in it. Maybe we should make a swap.
Fantastic. And again, it shows that there's so much work going into being part of a chief adjudication team, and that it's very much a position of responsibility as well. So thank you for taking up on that task. And it might sound daunting for certain individuals. Now you're going to be asked to be a CA, and it means that you're going to spend that much time doing it. So maybe to round off this interview, why should someone want to become a chief adjudicator of both an international competition as well as a local competition? What did you get out of it?
So I think what I got out of it is being able to realize a vision. And I came into this saying there are things that I really love about debating as a tool for life, not just a game that we do. And I really wanted to get people to share that vision and to be in a tournament that I think allows people to shine based on their ability to analyze and to think outside of the box, to know things but not to recite things, but I guess to integrate knowledge that they have into arguments, to have an appreciation for aesthetics, to have a tournament that is judged properly and that people feel that they have a chance based on their abilities and not necessarily different biases that might happen. And I think that I was able to do that. I'm not sure whether I succeeded or not, because that depends also on people's thoughts on this Euros, but I think at least I got people to think about those notions. And I hope people had a good time, which is also important, since we're not supposed to suffer too much when debating, I hope. So for me, it was really about that. And also, I think that you want to do this because you love the community, because in a way you are willing to do really, really hard work that you're not being compensated for, because it makes you feel good. It makes you feel that you've gotten from the community and now this is your moment to give back. And I definitely have a lot that I received from debating. So I got a hobby that I like. I got a profession. My friends are from debating. My fiance is from debating. So definitely I felt that it's something that I'm even obligated to do. So I think that's a reason.
That is, I think, not just as good a reason as any, but indeed a terrific reason to go on, give back, and also receive a lot more from debating when you are done with being an active speaker and indeed moving on to becoming a chief adjudicator. Thank you very much, Monica Forman, the chief adjudicator of this year's EUDC.
Thank you very, very much.